I had lived on Maplewood Drive long enough to recognize the difference between quiet and wrong. Quiet was the way the street settled after dusk. Porch lights humming, sprinklers ticking off, the occasional car door closing. Wrong was the feeling I got that October morning when I saw the moving truck parked in front of the abandoned house across from ours. That house had been empty for almost 6 years. No foreclosure sign, no auction notice. The previous owners, the Larkins, had left in the middle of the night. At least that's what people said. Lights off, cars gone, food still in the fridge when the bank finally sent someone out. After that, the place became a blank spot on the block. No kids dared each other to ring the bell. Even teenagers avoided it. So when the truck showed up, I remember standing at my kitchen window with my coffee cooling in my hand, watching 2 men haul crates up the walkway. Big crates, wood, reinforced corners, no markings. My wife, Dana, came up behind me and said, "Tell me you're seeing that too." "I am," I said. "Guess it's not a ghost house anymore." She didn't laugh. The man who moved in introduced himself exactly once. A few days later, he rang our doorbell just after sunset. When I opened it, he stood perfectly straight, hands clasped in front of him, like he'd practiced the posture. "Evening," he said. "I'm Harold Harlow. Just moved in across the street." He didn't offer a handshake, didn't smile. "Mark Collins," I said. "This is my wife." He nodded to Dana. His eyes flicked briefly past us, into our house, then back to my face. "I work night shifts," he said. "So if you see lights on late, that's normal." "That's fine," Dana said too quickly. He lingered a moment, like he might say more, then simply turned and walked back across the street. That was the last normal thing that happened. Within days, our dog, Max, started acting strange. He'd sit at the front window and growl low in his chest, hair raised, eyes locked on Harlow's house. Not barking, just watching. "Dogs sense things," Dana said one night. "Dogs also chase squirrels," I replied. But even I didn't believe myself. It was the lack of patterns that bothered me. No car, no trash cans at the curb, no groceries brought inside, but packages kept arriving, big ones, sometimes 2 or 3 at once. They'd sit on his porch during the day and vanish overnight. One afternoon, I was outside raking leaves when Mrs. Turner from down the block leaned over her fence. "You notice the new guy?" she asked. I nodded. "Ever see him leave?" "No." She shook her head. "Lights on all night, off all day, like a bat." That night, just after 11, Dana froze halfway up the stairs. "Do you hear that?" I did. A scraping sound. Metal on concrete. Slow, deliberate. It came from across the street. I stood by the window, careful not to turn on the light. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw his living room lit up. Shadows moved inside. Something large dragged across the floor. "It's probably furniture," I said, but my voice sounded thin. A week later, Dana came inside pale-faced. "He was standing behind the door," she said. "What?" I went to grab a package, looked up and saw him. Through the frosted glass. He wasn't moving, just standing there. "Maybe he didn't realize you were outside." "No," she said. "He knew." By November, other neighbors started talking. Security footage, late-night pacing, standing at the edge of driveways, staring at houses, not randomly, but methodically. Our daughter Emma stopped walking home alone. "He watches me," she said one night at dinner. Dana and I exchanged a look. "From where?" I asked. "The upstairs window," Emma said. "Every day around 5. Maybe he's just..." "He waved," she said. I waited. "And?" He didn't stop. The basketball showed up on our porch 2 days later. It belonged to the Morales kid next door. He'd kicked it over Harlow's fence during a game and bolted like he'd trespassed on a graveyard. That night, around midnight, Max growled. I opened the door. The ball sat dead center on our porch. Clean, dry, wrapped with twine. Dana covered her mouth. I'm calling the police, she said. They came the next day. Knocked. No answer. Left a card. More calls followed. Welfare checks. Nothing. December came with cold rain and shorter days. Then one afternoon, squad cars blocked the street. Officers went inside Harlow's house. They stayed for hours. When they finally emerged, one of them asked if anyone had a ladder. That night, an officer knocked on our door. Sir, he said, we found something you should know. The house was empty. Completely. No furniture, no crates, no signs of life. Except the basement. The walls were covered in sketches, pencil drawings, every house on the block, accurate down to siding cracks and mailbox dents. Certain windows were circled in red, ours included. He wasn't planning burglary, the officer said quietly. This was surveillance. Where is he? I asked. They didn't know. We moved 6 months later. Emma sleeps with her curtains closed now. So do we. Sometimes when I wake up at night, I swear I hear scraping. But it's just the house settling. I hope. Strange behavior isn't harmless just because it hasn't acted yet. Trust instincts. Speak up early. Patterns matter. Communities protect themselves only when people stop dismissing discomfort as paranoia. Because some dangers don't break in. They watch and wait. I moved into the apartment on East Calder Street in late August, the kind of time when summer hasn't quite loosened its grip, but fall is already waiting its turn. The building sat 8 stories high, concrete and glass, wedged between a laundromat and a half-empty strip mall. It wasn't pretty, but it was cheap, and for a junior drowning in student loans, cheap mattered more than charm. The leasing agent was upfront about the underground garage. It's safe, she said, smiling a little too quickly. Cameras everywhere. But yeah, people say it's creepy. I shrugged. I'd grown up in Chicago. Creepy was just another word for quiet. The garage was 3 levels underground, all raw concrete and fluorescent lighting that buzzed like tired insects. The ceiling felt low even though it wasn't. Sound traveled strangely there. Footsteps stretched too long. Car doors slammed twice. My parking spot was near a pillar close to the elevator, which I liked. Less walking, less time alone. The first week passed uneventfully. Classes, late nights at the library, instant noodles for dinner. I learned the building rhythms. Couples arguing through thin walls. Someone practicing violin badly on the 6th floor. The elevator that paused for half a second too long between levels. It was my second week when I came home after midnight from a study session. I remember, because my brain felt fried, formulas still swimming behind my eyes. I pulled into the garage, tires humming against the concrete ramp, and slowed as I approached my spot. That's when I saw her. She stood between 2 parked cars near my space, facing away from me. Long dark hair fell straight down her back, and she wore a blue dress, knee-length, neat, the kind someone might wear to a small ceremony or a formal dinner. It didn't belong in a garage. I rolled down my window. Hey, excuse me? She didn't move. I parked a little crooked engine still running and stepped out. Are you okay? I asked. Do you need help? She shifted then, just slightly. Not a full turn, just her head, angled enough that I could see the curve of her cheek, pale under the flickering light. Her voice was low, calm. Don't park here tonight. That was it. She walked away toward the far exit door, footsteps echoing softly. No rush, no fear, just certainty. I stood there for a second, then called out, "Wait, what?" No answer. I turned toward the hallway door. It hadn't opened. No beep. No echo. She was just gone. I laughed under my breath, more unsettled than amused. Probably someone from another floor. Probably messing with me. Still, I moved my car. The next morning I forgot about her. That's what I told myself anyway. In reality, the image lingered in the back of my mind while I sat through lectures and scribbled notes. But I pushed it aside. College teaches you to normalize exhaustion. Weird things feel less weird when you're tired. That night, I parked one row over from my usual spot, just in case. At 2:14 a.m., sirens tore through my sleep. I stumbled to the window with half-open eyes and saw flashing lights bouncing off the building across the street. People gathered on balconies, murmuring. Smoke curled up from the garage entrance like a dark finger pointing at the sky. By morning, the story was everywhere. A car had exploded in the garage. Fuel leak. The owner had thought it was fixed. 2 nearby cars were destroyed. Concrete walls blackened. Sprinklers triggered. No casualties. The photos online made my stomach turn. The epicenter of the damage was my usual parking spot. People talked in the elevator, in the lobby. Whispers layered with disbelief. Someone said a woman warned him. Security cameras didn't catch anyone. Probably just luck. I told myself the same thing. Luck. Coincidence. Relief wrapped in denial. A week passed, then another. I started staying later on campus, walking slower through the garage, listening to my footsteps. The cameras blinked red reassuringly. Nothing happened. Until the night I saw her again. She stood near the elevator entrance this time, hands folded in front of her, posture straight. Same blue dress, same stillness. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. She looked at me fully now. Her eyes were tired. Not sad, just focused. "Don't go up yet," she whispered. "What?" I asked. "Why?" But she was already stepping back, fading into the shadows between pillars. I hesitated. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Then the alarm sounded. Metal groaned. Lights flickered. The doors slammed shut halfway. Somewhere above, people shouted. Maintenance confirmed later that the elevator had jammed between floors. 2 residents trapped for nearly an hour. I stood there staring at the empty space where she'd been. I went to management the next day. The property manager, a woman named Lisa, smiled politely as I explained. Her expression tightened when I mentioned the dress. "We've reviewed the footage," she said carefully. "There's no one there." She turned the screen toward me. Grainy video showed the garage. Me, alone, talking to nothing. "No one else enters the frame," she added, "at any point." I left feeling embarrassed and unsettled in equal measure. The third time I saw her, I didn't question it. She stood beside a pillar, watching a car idle too long. She shook her head once. The driver pulled away moments later. The engine stalled down the ramp, smoke curling from the hood. I started paying attention. Not to her, but to what happened after. Leaks, sparks, loose railings, close calls that never quite crossed the line. I wasn't the only one who noticed things improving. The garage became quieter, safer. One evening, an elderly man stopped me near the mailboxes. "You've seen her," he said gently. I froze. "Who?" "The woman in blue." My throat went dry. "She died here," he continued. "Years ago. Fire. Tried to warn someone about a car leak." "Why me?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "Maybe because you listened." I stopped rushing. When she appeared, I listened. When she didn't, I stayed alert. I learned the difference between fear and caution. Some nights, she just stood there, waiting, watching, like a sentry. I never tried to follow her again. I didn't need answers. Graduation came, then summer. On my last night in the apartment, I parked one final time. She stood by the elevator. She nodded. That was all. I moved out the next morning. But sometimes, when I park in other garages, I pause before stepping out, just in case someone needs time. Warnings don't always come loudly, and protection doesn't always look dramatic. Paying attention, slowing down, and respecting quiet intuition can save lives. Sometimes your own, sometimes someone else's. Not every guardian wears a uniform, and not every danger announces itself. The choice to listen can make all the difference. My name is Olivia Finch. I've lived at 212 Maple Lane for 15 years. It's the kind of quiet, tree-lined street where nothing much happens, which is exactly how I like it. The only blight on the block was the house next door, 214. Old man Hargrove died there a decade ago, and the place fell into a slow, sad decay. It sat empty, windows boarded, lawn a jungle. For years, it was just me and the raccoons. So, when the sold sign went up last spring, I was thrilled. The prospect of neighbors, normal, living neighbors, felt like a blessing. When the moving truck finally arrived, I did what any good neighbor would do. I baked blueberry muffins. The family was young. The father, Mark, had a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. The mother, Sarah, was painfully thin, her movements quick and bird-like. Their daughter, Lily, was about 7, with serious dark eyes and 2 neat braids. She clung to her mother's leg. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, handing over the basket. "Thank you. That's so kind," Sarah said, her voice a whisper. She glanced past me into the shadowy foyer of their own home. As we stepped inside, I felt the chill immediately. The house was nearly empty. A single worn sofa faced a bare wall. A few cardboard boxes were stacked in a corner, and the air smelled of dust and mildew. Every window was shut tight, the locks visibly engaged. I noticed Lily hesitate at the threshold. Mark placed a firm, guiding hand on her back, practically ushering her in. "She's shy," he explained with that tight smile. My eyes were drawn to the door frames. Around the living room arch and the kitchen entrance, deep, ragged scratches gouged the wood. They weren't old. They looked frantic, like something had been trying to claw its way through. "Renovations?" I asked, pointing awkwardly. Mark's smile vanished. "Pests," he said flatly. Previous owner had a big dog. But the scratches were at shoulder height for a tall man. I left soon after, my skin prickling. That night, taking my terrier, Gus, out for his last walk, I glanced up at 214. In the top left window, a window I'd seen locked hours before, a silhouette stood. It was impossibly tall, its head brushing the top of the frame, perfectly motionless. It wasn't Mark. It was someone, or something, else. The next morning, the windows were all locked again. The family settled into a bizarre, silent routine. Mark left for work at the same time, but moved like a man walking through a minefield, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Sarah rarely emerged. When she did, to collect the mail or water a single pathetic potted plant, her eyes were hollow, darting toward the house as if expecting an attack. Lily was a ghost in her own yard. She'd swing on the rusted swing set, but her movements were listless, her eyes always fixed on her back door. I tried to be friendly, waving, offering to have Lily over to play. My offers were met with polite, panicked refusals. "She's not feeling social," Sarah would say, pulling her daughter close. One evening, a week after they moved in, a storm rolled in. The wind howled, and the old bones of 214 groaned. I was reading in my living room when Gus began to growl, low and steady, at the wall we shared with them. Thump. A heavy, singular impact shook the pictures on my wall. Then another. Thump. It was coming from their basement. I froze, my book forgotten. It wasn't the sound of a box falling. It was the sound of something striking solid wood with purpose. It stopped as abruptly as it started. 10 minutes later, through the sheeting rain, I saw Mark hurry out the back door with a large, heavy-looking black bag. He threw it into his car trunk and sped away. He returned an hour later, empty-handed. He stood in the driveway for a long time, just staring at his house in the rain, before squaring his shoulders and going back inside, like a soldier returning to a trench. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday. A crisp, cold autumn night. I was taking out the recycling when I saw a small, pale shape on my porch. It was Lily. She stood barefoot on the cold concrete in thin pajamas, shivering violently. Her face was streaked with tears. "Lily, honey, what's wrong?" I rushed toward her. She flinched but didn't run. Her voice was the faintest whisper, swallowed by the night. "Please don't tell my dad I came here." "Why not? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her braids swinging. Her eyes were huge with a fear no child should know. "He'll think it followed me." Before I could process her words, the front door of 214 flew open. Mark sprinted across the lawn, his face a mask of pure terror. He didn't yell. He scooped Lily up, holding her so tightly she gasped. "I'm so sorry, Olivia," he babbled, backing away. "She sleepwalks. She shouldn't have bothered you." "Mark, she's freezing. She said something about—" "She has nightmares," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "Just bad dreams. Thank you. Good night." He practically ran back inside, clutching his daughter. The door slammed shut, and I heard the distinct sound of multiple locks engaging. I stood frozen on my porch, Lily's whispered words echoing. "He'll think it followed me." 2 nights later, the sounds began in earnest. I was in bed when the first heavy thud echoed through the wall, then another. It was a footstep, but massive, ponderous, as if something huge and weighty was pacing in their living room. Thud, drag, thud, drag. Gus whined, burrowing under the covers. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then I heard Mark's voice, shrill with desperation. "No! Stay downstairs! You stay in the basement!" A guttural, grating sound answered him. Not words, but a vibration that made my teeth ache. The heavy footsteps descended. I heard the basement door slam. Then silence. For an hour, I debated. This wasn't a marital dispute. This was something else. Finally, fear for that little girl overrode my reluctance to intrude. I called the police. I told them I believed my neighbors were in danger, that I heard violent threats and strange movements. The police arrived 20 minutes later, their cruiser lights painting the quiet street in flashes of blue and red. They knocked on 214's door. No answer. They circled the house, shining flashlights. One officer tried the front door. It was unlocked. They went in. I watched from my window, clutching Gus. 5 minutes later, an officer came to my door. His face was grim. "Ma'am, the house is empty. No one is here." "That's impossible. Their cars are gone?" "Gone. And so is all their furniture, their belongings. Everything. It looks like they left in one hell of a hurry." I insisted on seeing. The officer, perhaps seeing my genuine shock, let me stand in the doorway of 214. The emptiness was absolute. The single couch, the boxes, the potted plant, all gone. Every window in the house was cranked wide open, curtains flapping in the night breeze, as if trying to air out a terrible smell. The door to the basement was not just open. It was off its hinges, leaning against the wall. The wood around the lock was splintered outward. "We're not going down there without backup," the officer said, shining his light down the stairs. The beam illuminated the concrete floor. There, In the thick dust were footprints. Large, bare, human-like footprints. They led from the bottom of the stairs across the floor to the far wall. And in that wall, behind where an old water heater had been pulled aside, was a jagged, dark hole. The cinder blocks had been broken inward, creating a passage just big enough for a large man to crawl through. The hole didn't lead outside. It led into the pitch-black space under the addition built onto the house decades ago, a sealed, forgotten crawl space. The police investigated. The family, Mark, Sarah, and Lily, were never found. No missing person report was ever filed by anyone else. It was as if they had never existed. The house is abandoned again, boarded up by the bank. The for sale sign is back, but it'll never sell. Sometimes, on the stillest nights, Gus still growls at the wall. And sometimes, I swear I see it. A tall, thin silhouette in the upstairs window, standing perfectly still, looking out at the world. Or looking at my house, waiting for the next family naive enough to think they're just buying a fixer-upper, and not a home that comes with a permanent hungry guest. The most dangerous prisons are not made of stone and lock, but of silence and fear. When something feels profoundly wrong, it is a warning to be heeded, not a curiosity to be ignored. Turning away from the suffering of others, even when clothed in the guise of not wanting to intrude, can make us complicit in their captivity. True neighborliness is not just about welcome muffins. It is the courage to see clearly, to ask hard questions, and to act when the whispers of distress cut through the quiet of a seemingly peaceful night. My name is Nina Reyes. I moved into the Parkview Terrace apartments in April, chasing a promotion and a fresh start. After 3 years in a crumbling walk-up with paper-thin walls, Parkview felt like a sanctuary. It was a solid red brick building with a tidy lobby and quiet hallways that smelled of lemon polish and quiet living. I met my neighbors quickly. Mrs. Gable in 3A brought me a pecan pie, her hands fluttering as she told me about the building's wonderful spirit. The couple in 2C, Ben and Shay, invited me for drinks. Everyone was friendly, talkative, normal. It was everything I'd wanted, except for the man in 3B. His door, directly opposite mine, was always slightly open, not welcomingly ajar, but cracked by 2 stubborn inches. It became my daily mystery. Sometimes, I'd glimpse the scuffed toe of a work boot, motionless on the floor just inside. Other times, I'd see the faint, dark suggestion of a shape standing back in the gloom, a silent sentinel. The first time I heard the click, I was locking my own door. It was a soft, metallic snick from across the hall. I turned, my heart jumping. The sliver of darkness in 3B's doorway seemed to stare back. "Hello?" I called, my voice too bright. Silence. It became a ritual. Every time I passed, the soft click of the peephole cover would follow my steps down the hall. Click, 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 with my stride. He was tracking me. I mentioned it to Mrs. Gable one afternoon. "Oh, that's just Mr. Clay," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "He's a quiet one. Keeps to himself. I think he works odd hours." She leaned in. "A bit odd, but harmless, I'm sure." Harmless. I tried to cling to that word. Then, one Tuesday after work, I found the note. A quick, furtive knock had sent me to the door. The hall was empty, but on my mat lay a single, folded sheet of white paper. The handwriting was a frantic, jagged scrawl, the ink dug deep into the fiber. "Don't trust the man in 3B. He watches." The paper trembled in my hand. Someone else knew. Someone else was scared too. The friendly facade of Parkview Terrace cracked open, revealing something cold and watching underneath. The note turned my fear into a solid, cold weight in my stomach. I called my friend Maya. "It's probably a prank," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Or a weird neighbor feud. Still, be careful. Use the chain. I did more than that. I bought a rubber doorstop and jammed it under the knob. That night, every creak of the old building was a footstep. Every whisper of the air conditioner was a breath. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard the real thing. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, heavy footsteps. They stopped right outside my door. I froze. The sheets clutched in my fists. I heard the subtle groan of the floorboard as weight settled against the wood. Then, the low, slow sound of breathing. A deliberate, audible exhale that seeped under the door. My own breath hitched. I was too terrified to move. Tap, tap, tap. 3 gentle, probing taps on the door. Not at knob height, but lower, as if someone was crouching there, testing the strength of the wood. A sound escaped my throat, a whimper of pure fear. The breathing stopped. After an agonizing minute, the heavy footsteps receded down the hall. I waited, shivering, for what felt like an hour before slinking out of bed. I pressed my eye to my own peephole. The hallway was dim and empty, but the door to 3B was wide open. For the first time, it gaped fully open, a perfect rectangle of pure, silent blackness. No light, no sound, no shadow of a boot. It was an invitation, or a threat. My blood ran cold. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was showing me the void he came from. At 7 a.m., I was in the building manager's office. Gary, a man with a perpetually weary expression, listened while I spilled the story. The door, the clicks, the note, the breathing. He frowned. "Miss Reyes, that's concerning. But apartment 3B is vacant. The tenant, Mr. Clay, moved out 2 months ago. We're between tenants." The floor seemed to tilt. "That's impossible. His door is always open. Someone is living there." Gary sighed, a long, suffering sound. "Let's go take a look." We stood in the hall with Hector, the maintenance supervisor. Mrs. Gable peeked out, her face tight with worry. Gary used his master key on 3B. The door swung inward. The apartment was a ghost of a home. A sofa and armchair were shrouded in white sheets like sleeping statues. Dust coated every surface, the windowsills, the floor, a lone side table. The air was stale and cold. "See?" Gary said, a note of vindication in his voice. "Empty." But Hector stepped inside, his eyes on the floor. "Hold on." In the thick layer of dust, a clear trail of footprints began from a hallway leading to the bedrooms and traveled straight to the threshold. They were large, masculine prints from a boot or sneaker. They were fresh, sharp-edged, and alone. No other prints disturbed the dust. "Someone's been walking here," Hector said softly. "Recently." Gary's face went slack. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." Detective Ruiz arrived, a calm, no-nonsense woman. She examined the footprints, which led to a bedroom closet. The closet was empty save for a rumpled sleeping bag, a few empty water bottles, and wrappers from protein bars. A nest. "Squatter," she confirmed. She turned to me. "The note?" I handed her the folded paper in a plastic bag. She studied it. "Someone else in the building knew. Didn't want to get involved directly, but wanted to warn you." She looked at the other doors. Fear often works in whispers. With the police report filed and the locks on 3B changed, a tense calm settled over the 3rd floor. But the mystery of the note gnawed at me. Who had left it? That person had been my silent guardian. I started paying closer attention. I thanked Ben and Shay for their support. "Did you ever see anything from that apartment?" I asked casually. Ben scratched his head. "You know, a few weeks ago I thought I heard a radio playing in there late at night. I figured the old tenant hadn't moved out yet. Didn't think much of it. I helped Mrs. Gable with her groceries. "It's just so frightening," she clucked. "To think he was right there. I told Gary we need better security lights." The note was so strange, I ventured. "Any idea who might have written it?" Her eyes darted away. "Oh, honey, no, but we all notice things, don't we? We just don't always say." Her words hung in the air. We all notice things. The breakthrough came from Leo, the quiet man in 1A who cared for his elderly mother. I found him struggling with a bag of recycling. As I helped him, I mentioned how grateful I was for the anonymous note. He went very still. His hands shook. I just knew you were new," he stammered, not meeting my eyes. "You seemed nice. He had a key. I saw him use it on the service entrance. He didn't belong." My breath caught. "You saw him?" Leo nodded, a quick, bird-like motion. "Many times. Late. He'd just stand in the hallway, listening. I was afraid for my mother. The note, it was all I could do." Tears of shame or fear welled in his eyes. "I'm not brave." "You were brave enough," I said, my voice thick. "Thank you, Leo." He had given the police a description. A man in a dark hoodie, average build, moving with quiet purpose. He'd had a key. That changed everything. This wasn't a random homeless person finding an open door. This was someone with access, with intention. Detective Ruiz followed the key lead. The former tenant, Mr. Clay, was a long-haul trucker. When pressed, he admitted an old roommate, a cousin named Derek, had never returned a key after a bitter argument a year ago. Derek had recent arrests for trespassing. The pieces fit. Derek knew the apartment was vacant. He had a key. He'd been using it as a free flophouse. My arrival, a new observant neighbor directly across the hall, had threatened his sanctuary. The taps on my door weren't just menace. They were the rage of a cornered animal being displaced. A warrant was issued, but Derek had vanished back into the city's shadows. The building installed a key fob system. Gary was replaced. 3B was rented to a loud, cheerful family with a baby. I changed too. I installed a steel security bar for my door. I took a self-defense class. My friendship with Leo became a quiet understanding. We'd share a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the fear we'd witnessed, and the small, fragile act of courage that had passed between us. One evening, months later, I came home. I used my key fob, heard the solid thunk of the lobby door locking. The hallway was bright. From behind the door of 3B, I heard the sound of a baby laughing. At my own door, I paused. I didn't just unlock it and rush in. I looked at the frame. I listened. Then I went inside, engaged the deadbolt, and slid the security bar into its bracket with a definitive clunk. The sound wasn't fear anymore. It was a ritual of vigilance. The man in 3B was gone, but the lesson remained, etched into my mind as clearly as those footprints in the dust. Safety is not a condition, but a practice. It is built on trusting your instincts, on the courage to see clearly, and on the understanding that sometimes the most important warnings come in whispers from those too afraid to speak aloud. True safety is not the absence of threat, but the presence of awareness. Trust your intuition. It is your first and finest line of defense. A community's strength lies not only in friendly greetings, but in the willingness to speak uncomfortable truths and protect one another. Silence protects only those who mean harm. Courage, even when it comes as a whisper, can be the loudest sound in the dark. I bought the house because I wanted quiet. After the divorce, after the noise of lawyers and paperwork and people telling me what I should feel, I wanted space that didn't ask questions. The farmhouse sat on 5 acres of land outside of Pine Hollow, the kind of rural town that existed mostly as a name on a map and a blinking caution light. No street lamps, no sidewalks, Just trees, fences, and long stretches of road where you could drive for 10 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. The realtor warned me about winter. "Storms roll through hard out here," she said, tapping the clipboard against her palm. "Power lines go down, roads close. You gotta be comfortable being alone." I told her I was, and most of the time, I was telling the truth. January came in sharp and early that year. Snow fell in thick, dry sheets that swallowed sound and erased landmarks. When the blizzard warning came through on the radio, I stocked up on firewood, charged my phone, filled the bathtub with water. Old habits from growing up rural kicked in automatically. By evening, the wind was screaming. The power cut out just after 9. The house went silent all at once. No heater hum, no refrigerator click. Just the sound of the storm throwing itself against the walls. I lit candles and pulled on every sweater I owned, settling on the couch with blankets tucked tight around me. The nearest neighbor, Tom, lived about half a mile down the road. We waved sometimes, shared small talk at the mailbox. That was it. By midnight, the snow was already knee-deep. That's when I heard footsteps. At first, I told myself it was an animal. Deer pass through the property sometimes. Coyotes, too. You get used to unfamiliar noises when you live far from people. But these footsteps weren't erratic or light. They crunched, slow, measured, heavy enough to compress the snow completely. They moved along the side of the house. I sat up straighter, every nerve in my body pulling tight. The wind rattled the windows, but the sound underneath it stayed steady. Someone, or something, was walking close. Too close. Then came the scraping, a soft, deliberate drag against the siding. Not random, not hurried. I stood and moved toward the living room window, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I lifted the corner of the curtain just enough to look out. At first, there was nothing but blowing white. Then I saw him. A tall figure stood at the edge of the trees, half swallowed by shadow. Heavy coat. Hood pulled low. He wasn't moving. Just watching the house. Watching me. I dropped below the sill so fast my knees hit the floor. My hands shook uncontrollably, my breath coming in shallow pulls. I counted silently. 10, 20, 30. When I looked again, he was gone. Relief barely had time to settle before I saw movement closer to the house. He stood beside my car now. He placed one hand on the hood, pressing down just enough to leave a perfect handprint in the frost. Then he stepped back, retreating into the dark like he'd never been there at all. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. No connection. I tried again. The call failed halfway through a ring. The storm had taken the towers. My chest felt tight, panic blooming fast and hot. The footsteps returned. This time they stopped at the kitchen door. The handle jiggled. Not violently, not desperate. Testing. I stood frozen in the hallway, gripping the fireplace poker like it could actually help me. The handle turned once more, then stilled. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost its shape. Then headlights cut through the storm. A truck pulled into my driveway, tires grinding against packed snow. Someone jumped out, shouting my name. It was Tom. I unlocked the door and nearly collapsed when I saw him. He ushered me inside his truck cab, warmth briefly before insisting we look around. He swept his flashlight across the yard. Tracks covered the snow. They circled the house, every window, the garage, the car. Tom frowned, crouching low. "These are fresh," he said slowly, "on top of the snowfall." I swallowed. "Where do they lead?" He scanned the darkness. They don't. There were no tracks coming in from the road, none from the woods, only the ones circling my house. Tom straightened, unease written plainly on his face. "Lila, something ain't right." We stayed together until dawn. The storm eased by morning. No sign of anyone. No explanation that made sense. The sheriff came later, took notes, offered platitudes. Couldn't explain the tracks either. Life returned to normal, but I didn't. I replaced locks, installed cameras, slept with lights on. And sometimes, during heavy snowfalls, I thought I heard footsteps again, just beyond the glow of the porch light, waiting. Spring came late. I never saw him again. But I sold the house that summer. Some places hold memories you don't want to keep. When I drive past open fields now, when storms roll in thick and quiet, I remember those tracks. Perfect circles in the snow, no beginning, no end. I used to believe routines were harmless, necessary, even. They made life efficient, predictable, safe. That was before I learned that predictability is not the same thing as security. I'm the kind of person people describe as low profile. I don't draw attention. I don't overshare. I pay my rent early and keep my headphones on in public. I thought that made me invisible. Turns out, it just made me easy to study. My life fit into clean, repeatable patterns. Wake up before sunrise. Coffee strong enough to burn. News muted because the noise made my chest tight. Same shoes, same jacket, same staircase, same timing, down to the minute. I didn't know someone else was memorizing it. I didn't know that my consistency was being treated like a script. The building was old and narrow. 4 floors stacked like a filing cabinet that had been dropped too many times. Sound carried badly. If someone sneezed on the 3rd floor, you heard it on the 1st. That's how I knew when someone moved into Unit 3B. There was no moving truck, no dragging furniture, no awkward knocks asking for help with a couch. Just a strip of masking tape appeared on the door one morning, the ink slightly smudged. Unit 3, BR, Hale. I stood there longer than necessary, reading it twice like it might change. I saw him once that first week. We passed on the stairs. He was tall, mid-30s maybe, wearing a gray jacket that didn't stand out. His face didn't either. Brown hair, brown eyes, the kind of person you forget immediately after seeing. Except he smiled like he recognized me. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, automatically. His timing was odd. He stepped out of his apartment seconds after I did, close enough that I felt his presence behind me but not close enough to feel threatened. At first, it felt normal. Coincidences happen. People leave for work around the same time, but coincidence doesn't keep pace when you slow down. The first real test was the stairs. I stopped halfway down to retie my shoe. I wasn't rushing. I wanted to see what would happen. Behind me, the footsteps stopped too. No shuffling, no weight shift, just stillness. I waited. So did he. When I stood back up, the footsteps resumed, perfectly spaced, like an echo that knew exactly when to follow. I told myself I was being paranoid. Stress does that. Living alone does that. Then things inside my apartment started changing. Small things, wrong things. My favorite mug was moved from the left side of the sink to the right. My coat was hanging inside out. My alarm tone changed. Same model phone, same default ringtone I'd heard through the wall when his phone rang. I started taking pictures before bed. Door locked, deadbolt engaged, chain secured. Still, I woke up tired. Like someone had been watching me sleep, memorizing how my chest rose and fell. One night, I heard him practicing. At first I thought he was on the phone. Then I realized he was repeating my voice. Not mocking, studying. He mimicked the pauses, the breath I took before speaking, the way my voice dipped at the end of sentences. I pressed my ear to the wall. "I'm fine," he whispered. My words, my voice. I confronted him in the hallway the next morning. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. "Are you copying me?" He looked genuinely confused. "I don't sound like you," he said. Then, after a moment, he smiled. "Not yet." That's when other people started acting strange. My coworker asked if I'd changed something about my appearance. I hadn't. A barista insisted I'd already picked up my order. My phone log showed outgoing calls I didn't remember making. Long conversations where I spoke confidently, clearly, like someone more decisive than me. I checked my reflection constantly. It started lagging. A blink delayed. A smile that came a second too late. I stopped trusting mirrors. I came home early one afternoon. My door was open. Inside, I heard movement. furniture shifting, someone humming. Then I heard my laugh. Perfect, familiar, effortless. He walked out wearing my jacket. Didn't run, didn't panic. "You're early today," he said. I screamed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You live so carefully," he said. "It takes effort to wear someone properly." The police found nothing. No lease, no fingerprints, no record of our Hale ever existing. They said Unit 3B had been empty. After that, reality thinned. I moved without deciding to, spoke without thinking. It felt like my actions were being rehearsed somewhere else first. The final morning, I woke up on my couch. Across the hall, Unit 3B was open. Inside was my life. On the wall, written in my handwriting, asterisk, asterisk, "You can rest now. I've got it. Asterisk, asterisk. The landlord says I moved out weeks ago. Everyone agrees. They say I seemed happier. The scariest thing isn't being watched. It's being understood so completely that someone else can step into your life and no one notices the difference. Routines create comfort but unchecked. They also create vulnerability. When you stop questioning the familiar, you stop protecting yourself. Pay attention to who's watching, and never assume that being quiet makes you invisible. Sometimes, it just makes you replaceable. I used to think time moved forward in clean lines. One day followed another. Cause led to effect. If something happened, there was always a reason you could point to, even if it was uncomfortable. I don't believe that anymore. Somewhere along the way, my days started slipping. Not dramatically at first, just enough to make me feel tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Like I was always arriving late to my own life. I lived alone because I liked the quiet, because I needed control over my space. Same grocery store, same walking route, same hours. I thought that made things simpler. I didn't know I was being measured against a future version of myself. The calendar was the first thing that felt wrong. It was taped inside my kitchen cabinet, right above the coffee mugs, yellowed paper, old wire binding, the kind you'd expect to see in a garage or basement, not a rental unit that had been repainted twice in 10 years. A date was circled in red. Tomorrow. I assumed it belonged to a previous tenant. People leave strange things behind. Notes, nails in walls, scratches on doors you don't want to ask about. I left it there. That night, I heard footsteps. They came from the wall I shared with the vacant unit next door. Slow pacing, back and forth, heavy enough to feel intentional. When I pressed my ear to the wall, the sound stopped immediately. Like it knew. The landlord had told me the unit was empty. No power, no water, no repairs finished. I reminded myself of that as I went to bed. At 2:13 a.m., I heard knocking, not on my door. On the wall, 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. I stayed silent. The knocking continued until my hands went numb. The next morning, there was a note under my door. "Sorry, wrong night." After that, my days stopped lining up properly. I woke up already exhausted. I found dishes in the sink I didn't remember using. My phone battery drained overnight with apps open I hadn't touched. One voicemail stopped me cold. My voice whispered, asterisk, "He's listening now, asterisk, timestamp, tomorrow." I finally saw him on a Tuesday afternoon. The door to the vacant unit creaked open as I carried groceries inside. A man stood there, thin, pale, eyes too alert. "You're late today," he said. I asked him who he was. He hesitated. "Your neighbor." Eventually, when I reported him, police found nothing. Empty unit, no signs of life, but the air inside was warm, lived in. The knocking returned, this time at my door. "I'm not here yet," he said calmly through the wood. "Once I am, it gets easier." The calendar began changing. Dates crossed out ahead of time. Notes in my handwriting warning me about myself. This is when you stop trusting mirrors. Reflections lagged. I saw him behind me before he was physically there. I dreamed his apartment furnished with my life. Photos of me taken from angles I didn't recognize. He wasn't stalking me. He was remembering me. I woke one night to find him sitting at my kitchen table. "You're catching up," he said gently. "That's dangerous." I asked what happened when I reached his day. "That's when I move out," he said. "And you move in." I understood then that he wasn't replacing me. I was becoming him. The police found my apartment empty the next morning. No signs of struggle, just the calendar. Today circled in red. The unit next door finally had its lights on, and someone inside was unpacking my life. When you live on autopilot, You stop noticing when your life starts moving without you. Pay attention to your days. Question what feels normal, because the moment you stop owning your time, someone else may decide to live it for you. I chose the house because it was quiet. It sat on the edge of a modest suburban street, identical to the others except for a slightly leaning mailbox and a maple tree whose roots had cracked the sidewalk. Nothing about it stood out. That was the point. I wanted a place where days blended together, where no one paid attention to who came and went. For most of my adult life, I believed anonymity was safety. I worked predictable hours. I bought groceries on Sundays. I watered the lawn on Wednesdays. The kind of routine people fall into without realizing it's happening. I told myself it was discipline, stability, proof that I had my life together. I didn't know routines could be studied. I didn't know consistency could invite someone in. And I didn't know how easy it was for another person to learn the shape of my life well enough to wear it. The first time I noticed him, it barely registered. I stepped outside at 6:45 a.m., briefcase in hand, coffee cooling too fast in my travel mug. Across the street, my neighbor stood on his porch holding a mug of his own. He wasn't drinking it, just holding it, watching. He didn't wave. I nodded, more out of habit than friendliness, and walked to my car. In the side mirror, I saw him still standing there. The next morning, he was there again. Same spot, same mug, same stillness. I started to notice patterns. If I left early, he was already outside. If I overslept, his porch light flicked on right before I opened my door. When I came home late, his silhouette appeared at the edge of his porch as I turned the corner. I told myself he was retired, lonely, maybe bored. That explanation worked until it didn't. The first thing that changed was my trash bin. I rolled it out one evening and noticed it had been moved closer to his fence. Not much. Just a foot or two. Enough to feel intentional. Then my gate was unlatched. Twice. I installed a porch camera. A week later, it was angled downward, just enough to miss the sidewalk. That night, he spoke to me. "You left at 6:52 today," he said casually. "Traffic must have been bad." I froze. He smiled like we were discussing the weather. The notes appeared after that. Not threats. Corrections. "You usually lock the back door. You didn't eat dinner Tuesday. You forgot your light on." I stopped sleeping. I started doubting myself. Once, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom wall, pacing in time with my breathing. When police found nothing, he smiled the next morning. "You slept better last night," he said. I realized then that the worst part wasn't being watched. It was being known. I began changing my routine deliberately, leaving at random times, turning lights on and off unpredictably. He adjusted faster than I could. "You're tired," he said once. "That's why you're slipping." I hated that he was right. The more I tried to escape my routine, the less I trusted myself. The more I relied on his observations to know what I had done. He wasn't following me anymore. He was maintaining me. The final night, I confronted him. "I want you to stop," I said. He looked genuinely surprised. "But I'm keeping everything running," he said calmly. "You were losing track." That's when I understood. He wasn't replacing me. He was becoming the version of me that functioned better than I did, and I was letting him. Routine can bring comfort, but when you stop questioning it, you stop protecting yourself. Pay attention to who notices your patterns. Pay attention to who benefits from knowing your life better than you do. Because the most dangerous thing isn't being watched. It's slowly forgetting who your life belongs to. Buying my first house was supposed to mean independence. That's what I told everyone. That I was done with thin apartment walls, noisy neighbors, and the sense that my life was always overlapping someone else's. I wanted space, privacy, a place where nothing happened unless I invited it. The realtor described the neighborhood as quiet. She said it like a promise. The street curved gently instead of running straight, which made it feel enclosed, insulated from the rest of the town. Most of the houses looked lived in but not loved. Lawns trimmed, blinds drawn, porches used more for storage than sitting. And at the very end of the street was the house that never changed. No lights, no decorations, no cars. Just peeling paint and a roof sagging slightly, like the structure was tired of holding itself together. I didn't think much of it then. I didn't know that stillness could be intentional. The first knock came 3 weeks after I moved in. It was late. After 10, the kind of late where any noise feels deliberate. The knock itself was careful, 3 taps. evenly spaced. Not urgent. Not casual. When I opened the door, a man stood on my porch. He was thin, mid-40s maybe, wearing a jacket that looked older than it should have been. His smile was polite, rehearsed. His eyes, though, didn't settle on my face. They drifted past me, scanning the hallway behind my shoulder. "Sorry to bother you so late," he said. "I live down the street, end house." Of course he did. "I was wondering if you had some water. My pipes are acting up." It felt reasonable, neighborly. I filled a bottle and handed it over. His fingers brushed mine, lingering half a second too long. "Thank you," he said. "You're usually home around this time." I laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, guess so." He nodded, like that confirmed something, and left. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to his footsteps fade. He came back 3 nights later. Batteries this time, then food. Always after dark, always calm, always unsurprised to see me. Once, when I hesitated before opening the door, he smiled through the glass. "I know you're home," he said gently. That was the first night I didn't sleep. I started noticing small things. My trash cans shifted closer to the street. A porch light turned off that I didn't remember switching. Doors that closed too easily or resisted just slightly when they hadn't before. When I stopped answering the door, he knocked anyway. Sometimes he waited. Sometimes he whispered my name through the wood, slow and patient, like he wasn't worried about being heard. The worst part wasn't the knocking, it was how he knew things. "You had a headache today," he said once through the door. "You kept the lights off longer." I asked him how he knew that. There was a pause. "You forget how visible routines are," he said. I installed cameras. They caught nothing. No movement, no one approaching, but I still found evidence of adjustment. My life nudged, rearranged. I began questioning my own memory, whether I was locking doors, turning off lights, taking out trash. The sense of being watched didn't spike. It settled. The final knock was frantic. "There's a leak," he said. "Something dangerous." Against every instinct I followed him. His house was hollow, cold, empty of any sign of living. No furniture, no warmth. In the basement, the walls were carved with deep grooves overlapping marks, some fresh, some worn smooth by repetition. When I refused to go further, he ran not away, but toward the stairs, blocking me. He hesitated, and that hesitation saved me. Police found nothing. No records, no fingerprints, no sign anyone lived there. The house at the end of the street remains unchanged. Sometimes I still hear knocking. Sometimes I still feel like something already knows when I'm home. What haunts me isn't the chase. It's realizing the fear started long before I noticed it. Safety isn't just about locked doors and quiet neighborhoods. It's about paying attention to patterns, especially when someone else seems to know them better than you do. Because the most dangerous intrusion isn't forceful, it's familiar.